For the last 2 decades, Ireland has been one of the biggest economic success stories in Europe. A small country on the edge of the continent somehow managed to attract some of the largest companies in human history. Apple, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Intel, Pfizer. Almost overnight, Dublin transformed into the European headquarters of global capitalism. High-paying jobs flooded into the country, tax revenues exploded, property prices skyrocketed, and Ireland started posting economic growth numbers so absurd that economists literally had to invent new terms to explain them. But there was always a problem hiding underneath the surface, because Ireland didn't build an economy around Irish companies. It built an economy around convincing foreign corporations to stay. And now, for the first time in years, that model is starting to crack. Introduction and context. Ireland's transformation was genuinely remarkable. Back in the 1980s, the country was struggling with unemployment, emigration, weak industrial output, and stagnant economic growth. Young Irish workers were leaving the country in huge numbers looking for better opportunities abroad. But over time, Ireland made a series of decisions that completely changed its economic trajectory. The country lowered corporate taxes dramatically. It joined the European single market. It invested heavily into education. And perhaps most importantly, it positioned itself as an English-speaking gateway into the European Union. For American corporations, the pitch was irresistible. Companies could access the entire EU market while paying some of the lowest effective corporate tax rates in the developed world. And the strategy worked massively. By the 2010, Ireland had become one of the largest corporate hubs in Europe. Some estimates suggest that US multinationals account for well over half of Irish corporate tax revenue today, but that success created a dangerous dependency. Because when your economy becomes reliant on a handful of global corporations, you stop fully controlling your own economic future. The economic engine. To understand why this matters, you first need to understand how unusual Ireland's economy actually is. Ireland's domestic economy is relatively small. The country has a population of just over 5 million people, yet despite this, it consistently reports GDP figures comparable to much larger economies. That sounds impressive until you realize a huge portion of that economic activity comes from multinational accounting structures rather than traditional domestic production. This became so extreme that in 2015, Ireland recorded GDP growth of over 26% in a single year, a figure so bizarre that economist Paul Krugman famously referred to it as leprechaun economics. A lot of this growth was driven by intellectual property transfers, corporate restructuring, and tax optimization strategies by multinational firms. Now, to be fair, this doesn't mean Ireland's success is fake. Far from it. These companies still created real jobs, real infrastructure, real investment. Dublin genuinely became one of Europe's major tech centers. The problem is that the entire system became heavily concentrated around foreign capital, and foreign capital is loyal to incentives, not countries. The moment those incentives weaken, capital can move somewhere else surprisingly quickly. The hidden weakness. And this is where the cracks started appearing. For years, Ireland looked almost unstoppable. Big tech companies kept expanding. More workers kept arriving. Office towers kept rising across Dublin. Investors believed the boom would continue for decades. But economies built around global corporations can change very quickly when the global economy changes. Over the past few years, the world entered a very different financial environment. Interest rates started rising sharply across Europe and the United States. Borrowing money became far more expensive. Investors became more cautious. Suddenly, the era of easy money was over, and that hit the technology industry hard. For years, companies like Meta, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft had been growing aggressively. They hired huge numbers of workers because money was cheap and investors rewarded rapid expansion. But once the economy slowed down, priorities changed. Instead of growth at all costs, companies started focusing on efficiency, profitability, and cost cutting. Layoffs began spreading across the tech sector. Meta cut thousands of jobs. Amazon slowed hiring. Google became more cautious about expansion. Many smaller startups struggled to survive as investment funding dried up. And because Ireland had become so connected to the tech industry, these global decisions immediately affected the Irish economy. This is one of the biggest risks of Ireland's economic model. Many of the most important decisions affecting Irish jobs are not actually made in Ireland. They are made in corporate headquarters in California, Seattle, New York, and other global business centers thousands of kilometers away. If executives in the United States decide to reduce hiring, Irish workers feel the impact. If global profits decline, Irish tax revenues can suddenly weaken. If multinational companies decide another country offers better conditions, investment can slowly move elsewhere. That creates a level of uncertainty that many countries do not face to the same extent. At the same time, pressure on Ireland's tax system also started increasing internationally. For decades, Ireland attracted companies partly because of its low corporate tax rates. Large multinational corporations could route profits through Ireland and pay significantly lower taxes compared to many other developed economies. Critics argued that this gave Ireland an unfair advantage. Countries like France, Germany, and the United States became increasingly frustrated that huge corporations were generating billions in profits while paying lower taxes through international structures connected to Ireland. Eventually, global negotiations pushed for a worldwide minimum corporate tax agreement. The goal was simple: reduce the ability of corporations to shift profits to low-tax countries. Now, Ireland still remains an attractive place for business. It still offers skilled workers, political stability, strong institutions, and access to the European market. But the tax advantage that once made Ireland stand out so dramatically is becoming smaller. And that matters because Ireland's success was never built on only one factor. It was built on a combination of advantages working together: English-speaking workforce, European Union access, educated population, business-friendly policies, and very favorable taxation. If one of those major advantages weakens, the overall system becomes less powerful. But there was another major problem growing quietly in the background during all of this: housing. As Ireland became richer, property prices exploded. Dublin especially became one of the most expensive cities in Europe relative to income. Rent prices surged year after year. Buying a home became increasingly difficult for younger workers. Many people found themselves spending huge portions of their salaries just on housing costs. And this created a strange contradiction. The very companies bringing high-paying jobs into Ireland were also indirectly making life far more expensive for ordinary residents. More foreign investment increased demand for housing. More workers arriving increased competition for apartments. Limited housing supply pushed prices even higher. Over time, infrastructure struggled to keep pace with the country's rapid economic expansion. Transportation systems became strained. Housing shortages worsened. Public services faced growing pressure. Workers earning strong salaries still found themselves struggling with the cost of living. Some young professionals even began leaving Dublin because the city had become too expensive to comfortably build a future there. And once housing becomes a major national problem, it starts affecting the economy itself. Companies may struggle to attract talent if workers cannot afford to live nearby. Young workers may delay starting families or buying homes. Consumer spending can weaken because more income goes toward rent. Economic growth starts creating social pressure instead of only prosperity. Ironically, Ireland became partly trapped by its own success. The boom created wealth, but the boom also created costs. Escalation and domino effects. Now, this does not mean Ireland's economy is about to suddenly collapse. Ireland still remains one of the strongest economies in Europe in many important ways, but the situation reveals how dependent the country has become on forces outside its control. And once an economy becomes highly concentrated around a small number of industries or companies, even small disruptions can create larger chain reactions. Imagine if several major multinational companies significantly reduced operations in Ireland over the next few years. The impact would spread far beyond the technology sector itself. First, hiring would slow down, then fewer high-income workers would enter the country. Consumer spending would weaken as households became more cautious. Restaurants, hotels, shops, and local businesses would feel the pressure. Housing demand could slow, affecting property developers and construction companies. Construction projects might be delayed or canceled. That would impact employment in building industries. Government tax revenues could also weaken at the same time. And this is especially important because Ireland has become increasingly dependent on corporate tax income from multinational companies. A surprisingly small number of corporations now account for a massive share of Irish corporate tax revenue. That creates enormous risk. Because if profits at just a few companies decline, government revenues can suddenly change very quickly. In some years, a handful of corporations generate a huge percentage of total tax collections. That means the Irish government cannot always fully predict how stable those revenues will remain long-term. When times are good, tax revenues surge. But during global slowdowns, those same revenues could become far more volatile. And governments that grow used to high tax income often expand spending commitments based on expectations that good times will continue. That becomes dangerous if revenues later fall unexpectedly. There's also another important shift happening globally: remote work. Before the pandemic, major office hubs were extremely important. Companies wanted workers physically located near headquarters and business centers. That helped cities like Dublin grow rapidly, but remote and hybrid work changed some of those assumptions. Today, many employees can work from almost anywhere. Companies are questioning whether they still need enormous office spaces. Workers themselves are becoming more geographically flexible, and this creates a difficult long-term question for countries like Ireland. If global corporations become less dependent on centralized office locations, will business hubs remain as powerful as they once were? The answer is still unclear, but it introduces another layer of uncertainty into Ireland's future economic model. Now, despite all these challenges, Ireland still has major strengths. The country has a highly educated workforce. It has strong legal institutions. It remains deeply connected to global markets. It still offers valuable access to the European Union. And unlike some tax havens, Ireland built real industries and real economic activity alongside its corporate incentives. The success was not entirely artificial. Millions of people genuinely benefited from the transformation. Jobs were created. Infrastructure improved. Living standards rose dramatically compared to previous decades. Ireland's rise remains one of the most remarkable economic stories in modern Europe. But the deeper lesson goes far beyond Ireland itself. Modern economies increasingly compete against each other for global capital. Countries now market themselves almost like businesses. They compete using tax systems, regulations, skilled labor, infrastructure, education, and quality of life. And when investment flows in, growth can happen incredibly fast. But dependence on foreign capital always creates vulnerability, because foreign investment is rarely permanent. Money moves where conditions are most favorable. If another country becomes cheaper, more efficient, or more attractive, corporations can adapt surprisingly quickly, and smaller economies are often more exposed to those shifts because they rely more heavily on external investment. Ireland spent decades building one of the most successful economic transformations in modern European history. A country once associated with unemployment and emigration turned itself into one of the world's biggest technology and corporate hubs. That achievement is real. But now comes the harder challenge. Can Ireland evolve beyond the exact model that created its success? Can it reduce dependence on a small number of multinational corporations? Can it solve its housing crisis before affordability damages long-term growth? Can it build an economy that remains stable even when global corporations slow down? Those questions will shape Ireland's future over the next decade. Because building an economic miracle is one thing, making it sustainable is something far more difficult.